Hi, my name's Dave and I like to test in prod. The title of my festive polemic is #NoStaging, which is a terrible title, but these are the ones that I could have gone with. So you've got off likely. Staging considered harmful. Where we're going, we don't need staging. Staging is hard, let's go shopping. I know, I'll use staging now. You've got two problems and all the world's a stage and the email address is merely test@example.com. So we got off pretty lightly with #NoStaging. And what I want to do is persuade you to possibly rethink a kind of reflexive move towards having a permanent multi-purpose staging environment that sits in some kind of permanent relationship to production. Who works with some kind of staging environment in this room right now? Great, this is going to be easy then, isn't it? So fantastic. So I think that speaks to the point that it's just a kind of default, some kind of staging environment is just a default part of many people's release pipelines. In fact, it's one of the, maybe the first thing you might think of when you're building out a release pipeline. What a more nuanced way of what I want to say is that I think twice before you reach for that environment, because the costs are surprisingly high, the confidence it gives you is surprisingly low, and there are better options. So first what I want to do is look at the word staging, because I think this is responsible for hiding some of this complexity. It's a bit of a weasel word, it's a bad name, it's vague. So what I did was I went around and did a bit of research, asked a few friends, read a few things about what they meant when they were talking about a staging environment. Straight out of the book, staging environment is identical to a production environment. Well, that just can't be true. That logically can't be true, because if it's identical to production, it is production. And have you ever found yourself say, yes, but in staging, ... Yes, but in staging, we don't have SSL. Yes, but in staging, networking runs differently. Yes, you've got to connect over VPN to staging, or whatever it might be. Who's actually found themselves do that? That speaks to the point that suddenly all these little differences, you've worked really hard to maintain this parity between staging and production, but all these little micro differences have crept in and are going to have really fun and exciting consequences and surprising consequences when you do actually push to production. So then I went to ask someone else. This was quite neat. I thought staging is production minus users. Well, again, I mean, that sounds like it can't be right, because we need some kind of data typically to actually have something that corresponds, something that's actually worth exercising, worth testing. And how you get that data is occasionally commonly quite a hard engineering problem. Are you going to use fake data, which probably means that you're not going to surface some of the problems that actually occur with real data in production. You'll probably find that whatever tool you're using to create that fake data has got a much more limited character set, for example, or you haven't, essentially fuzz test it in the way that you might do in production. Or are you going to take some of your production data, slice it in some way that makes sense and keeps all the relationships accurate, anonymize it, and then deliver it, and do that on a repeatable basis? That's actually a fairly challenging task, and if you can avoid doing it, then I'd say avoid doing it. I asked somewhere else, and they said it's like a mirror of production, and this I quite like, because mirrors are quite tricky things. On the first glance, they look just like reality, but they kind of swap left and right and not up and down, except if you're standing on one, and actually don't swap left and right, they're swapping front and back. So it's kind of subtly confusing, and that I think is one of the challenges of having a staging environment, is that it tends to have all of these subtle differences between production, and to really use it effectively and not be surprised by it, you've got to build up this arcane set of knowledge about all the little ways in which your staging environment differs from your production environment. And that's a cost, and it decreases the amount of value you get from this thing, because it's all about building confidence about releasing stuff in production. So I say, let's call it what it is. It's a sham, right? I think a much better term for it would be simulation environment, because that makes it explicit that what you're doing is simulating some aspect, or one or more aspects of production, rather than it's identical, it's a mirror, or whatever it might be. So, okay, we might say, fine. There's some costs associated with staging. There's some complexities there, whatever. My target is really this. It's a permanent general purpose simulacrum of production where typically all releases flow through it before production. And the default reaction is we need it because we don't pest in prod. Well, my view is you can, and in some cases you should. And the reason for that is because there are many different activities covered by the word test. And when you start to unpack those different activities, you'll find that there are very good strategies that mean you don't actually necessarily need this staging environment. So the classic one is UAT, QA, or some kind of sign-off. You know, is a logo big enough? Are our customers going to be disgusted by this? Is this, you know, have we actually created something worthwhile? Totally legitimate activity. I am definitely not saying that this should not take place. I'm saying that it doesn't necessarily need its own environment. I think feature flags and being clever with database migrations, maybe having constructive and destructive changes, that kind of thing, can get you a very long way. And before you reach for staging, have a think well, what you can do with feature flags and sensible database migrations. Next one. Well, okay, fine. So you're going to test in prod. Well, that means you're going to muck up my purity-driven snow production data store. Well, yeah, no. I mean, firstly, I very much doubt that it is purity-driven snow. I bet there's a lot of junk in there. And if there isn't, that's because you're already doing things like filtering it, partitioning it, resetting it, and cleaning it. You're already doing those activities in production. So to maintain data integrity, if you want to test in prod, just do the same things you're already doing. And then when you press people, it's like, well, yeah, but I really need to see it. You know, I just want to see it with my own eyes before it goes in front of a customer, before it goes in front of my manager, before it goes in front of a customer. And firstly, feature flags could probably achieve that. And secondly, that's basically just squeamishness, right? That's kind of like dark age superstition. And the solution to that is better instrumentation, it's better logging, it's better metrics, it's being aware of the state of your system and the success that it is fulfilling its criteria. And typically the root of that squeamishness is because that instrumentation doesn't exist, or because you're not confident in the code, because you don't have good test coverage, or you don't have good code development practices. Integration. Staging is the place where integration happens. I want to wire all the stuff together. So surely that's a safe place to do it. Well, I think there are a lot of patterns, of which I'm just going to name, and if it was a longer talk, we could go through in some more detail. There are a lot of patterns and approaches that mitigate the need for staging, like circuit breakers, or back off, or versioning, or kill switches, or dark launches, or rolling releases, or branch by abstraction. All of these things mitigate the need to have an entirely separate place to test how things connect together. Moreover, all of these things you should be, I feel, we should be doing anyway. This is the kind of defensive coding practice that makes good sense if you're building a distributed system. And it's the kind of practice that makes sense from the point of view of being able to release incrementally. Anything else is counterproductive and kind of, I guess this leads me to my strongest statement, which is Theorem 1, which means if there's a way of releasing something without downtime, then you don't need staging to do it. If you've worked out a way of getting it into prod without downtime, then you've worked out a way of circumventing the need for staging. So you might be thinking, well, that's all very well and good, and you know, we don't have the luxury of doing any of these things because, you know, reality is reality, and reality doesn't give a two cents about your opinions, because being dumb in staging beats being clever in production, because it's cheaper, because I don't have to think, it's faster, and so forth. Well, what I'd say about that is I've got some sympathy there. Being dumb can become a habit, I suppose, and to reiterate, I think some of these practices we should be adopting anyway. If you're relying on staging to such a great extent that you don't have any of those defensive practices anyway, you're basically saying, oh, don't worry, we only make accidents happen when it's safe to do so. And I just think, you know, that's unrealistic. So this leads me to my second theorem, which is If it's a routine activity, if it's some kind of routine testing, then almost certainly it can be pushed into prod or dev in some way, and you don't need a specific environment for it to take place in. But if it's really complex and unique and snowflake, then your one-size-fits-all multi-purpose staging environment isn't going to help you, because you're going to need to adapt it to the particular context of whatever that complex change is. So I'm all in favor of being able to, or of having the ability to stand up ad hoc, ephemeral, whether it's a branch build that Heroku will allow you to do, or whatever it might be. It's that permanent, fixed environment staging that sits in a defined place in your pipeline that I think we should just think twice about. And the reason for that is you get a longer feedback cycle, there's a surprisingly high cost and complexity, you introduce new and really exciting failure modes, you get lower than expected confidence, and there's just often better options. And that's it. Thanks.